I'm here today with Tim Heath, who is the winemaker at Cloudy Bay, probably one of the most famous wines in the world, of course from New Zealand. Tim, before we start talking about the wines individually and going through them, perhaps you could tell me a little bit about how Cloudy Bay evolves. I mean, it's in the Marlborough area of New Zealand. I've been lucky enough to go there. But if you could perhaps tell people a little bit about the company.
Sure thing. We started in 1985. A gentleman called David Honan, who started the Cape Nantel winery in Margaret River in Western Australia, tasted some Sauvignon that was brought over by a bunch of visiting Kiwi winemakers, and was pretty taken by the aromas and flavours that he saw in those wines, and decided to head over to New Zealand and go on a bit of a search for a region to grow Sauvignon Blanc, and looked at a number of regions, but ultimately settled on Marlborough, on the top of the South Island.
But there was wine being made in the Marlborough region at that time, was there?
There had been some prior to that, but a lot of pretty horrible neutral varieties, things like Breidecker and bits and pieces. So really the proper birth of the Marlborough region was really around about 25 odd years ago.
I mean, that's incredible really when you stop and think about it. Only 25 years old.
It's not a long time, especially in old world terms. But
I think there's an interesting fact that in Hugh Johnson, is the famous wine writer who brings out a big book, Hugh Johnson Wine Atlas. I think certainly in the late 1970s, it says Australia and New Zealand. Then under New Zealand it says any wine made in this region is purely of local consequence.
Yeah.
So you look at it now, it's just extraordinary.
Yeah.
How it has changed.
Back at that time, it was probably quite accurate.
So you found some land there and planted Sauvignon.
That's correct.
Right. And when did the other grape varieties, the Pinot, the Chardonnay, come in?
So the Pinot and Chardonnay, I guess, technically arrived back around about 1987 or thereabouts.
Right.
With the birth of this wine, the vintage Polaris.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Then the non-vintage was made around about 1991.
Right.
And then still wine Pinot really came onto the scene in the early 90s, similar time, sort of 92, 93. And the Chardonnay's been with us since about 88.
Okay. And do you have other varieties that aren't here?
We make some Gewürztraminer.
I thought you did.
Yeah.
But is that just sort of, do you sell that over here, or is it basically kept in New Zealand?
Minuscule quantities. You might find.
Any Pinot Gris?
We are making some Pinot Gris. Have been since about 2003 actually, but only really had one out in the marketplace since 2007.
And is there anything else that might work out there in the future, you think?
We've been making a dry Riesling for a while, and also some late harvest Riesling, but I don't think they've found their way over to the UK marketplace yet.
And how many acres do you have under your own ownership under vine?
Yep, we're looking at around about 150. We tend not to talk too much about numbers.
Okay.
But a split of 60% estate vineyards and 40% growers.
Right.
But back in '85 when we first started, we had no bearing estate vineyards. They were all just cuttings in the ground working their way up to the wire.
Yeah.
So all of the fruit came from growers.
I remember, I think Isabel was one of the companies that actually provided fruit for your wines. And
it may have been in those early days, but
that's what they told me.
Yeah.
You haven't been there long enough to know.
No, I've been there for 6 years, obviously not 25. But essentially, the core group of growers that were with us since 1985 are still with us today, and we see them essentially as an extension of our estate. They're quite amenable to us going in and sort of suggesting certain things as far as canopy management and other viticultural inputs, and that works well for us. We look after them, they look after us.
Fine. Well, that's great. Well, I think what we'll now do is taste the individual wines and go through them one at a time.